the Cleats First, Logic Second football podcast with your hosts Alexander Lauber and Phil Almodovar.
Welcome, one and all, to the third episode of the Cleats First, Logic Second football podcast. Phil, we're here today to talk about something that doesn't excite you or I based off of current form, like within the history of the last 10 years of this football club. There's a lot of potential, but it seems like there's too many obstacles standing in the way. So let's break down the shambolic state that Arsenal Football Club finds itself in.
Yeah, and we don't want to talk about this obviously as Arsenal fans, but we kind of have to. It's a hot topic. It's something that needs to be addressed, and we're going to go through it from top to bottom for you guys, and we're going to give our opinions, whether they be contrary to popular ones or not, and of course, let you guys know if there is a solution to Arsenal's current problems.
Phil, why don't you start off giving us a little preface on the background of Arsenal Football Club?
Yeah, I feel like to start off, not everyone watching this is a stringent fan of the sports. So we got some casual fans out there listening. And for those casual fans, Arsenal, if you may or may not know, is definitely one of the biggest, winningest clubs in England, based in North London and currently playing at the Emirates Stadium. They have been a force in England's top division. They have won the top of the top division 13 times, 3 times since the inception of the Premier League in 1992. They have won the FA Cup a record 14 times. They've won the Community Shield 16 times and are owned by billionaire Stan Kroenke. They are managed by former player Mikel Arteta, and they are valued by Forbes at a whopping £1.5 billion. Arsenal have to be considered one of the biggest clubs in the world. They've had some of the best players to graze the pitch: Thierry Henry, Mark Overmars, Tony Adams, Patrick Vieira, Dennis Bergkamp, just to name a few. And of course, have seen some glory years. However, now, not looking like so much. They have been in the dumps in 15th place in the Premier League. And the question, Alex, is if we're talking about a team that has had so much success, so much glory in the past, how have they gotten now to this point?
Now, you can point fingers at a bunch of different things. However, I think one problem is bigger than the rest of them. And why don't we start off with ownership and with the board of directors? So he owned several American sport franchises, owns notably the Los Angeles Rams and a bunch of teams in the Colorado area, the Colorado Avalanche, the Colorado Rockies, just to name a few. However, to look at Stan Kroenke, you have to start off with his history at Arsenal. September 19th, 2008, he joined the board of directors. Slightly before then, he started buying up some shares in the club, and shortly after, he became a majority shareholder and chairman of the club. Since he took control of Arsenal, he has seemed to not back the club at all. And that's been one of the biggest criticisms of him. Now, Phil, do you think it's a lack of interest, or does he just find this to not be a worthwhile business venture, even though that Arsenal is by far his most profitable sports organization and sporting brand within his portfolio?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Alex, because like you say, Arsenal definitely are the most profitable of the teams that he owns. He owns the Los Angeles Rams, the Colorado Rapids, Colorado Avalanche, just to name a few. And obviously, Arsenal is bringing in the most revenue out of all of them. However, it seems that he values other teams like the Los Angeles Rams more. I mean, just look at what he's done for the Rams. He has pretty much financed, for the most part, mostly financed this new billion-dollar stadium in Los Angeles. And it's disheartening for Arsenal fans to see because, Alex, as we're going to go into, his financing of Arsenal, not so much.
No, not at all. And I should correct myself. I meant to say the Colorado Rapids, not the Rockies. The Rockies, the MLB team in Colorado, are owned by a different ownership group. But that being said, yeah, just to put this into perspective and the backing situation into perspective, from 2008 to 2017, Arsenal have generated operations revenues of around £754 million. To put that into perspective, that's the second highest revenue generating team behind Manchester United at £1.307 billion. The next closest to Arsenal is Tottenham at £675 million. That being said, when you look at owner financing, aka the amount of money that owners inject into a club, Arsenal sits at the bottom in that time period with a whopping £0 put in. Not even £1 was injected by Stan Kroenke to the club at this time. And again, to put that into perspective, Manchester City, we know what's happened there. In that time period, they injected £1.275 billion into the club. So, for those of you who don't have an idea how this works, these operating revenues, so the money that the team makes from the prior season, usually that helps to fund a portion of the team's expenses the following season, whether it be wages, player acquisitions, and then just other general expenses that come with running the team. And again, the big key one here is player acquisitions. It doesn't come cheap, and we know how it's getting more expensive over the years. But all of these other big clubs, like the Man Cities, like the Manchester Uniteds, like the Chelseas, and even Tottenham to a degree. I mean, Tottenham only had £14 million injected, but we've seen it with them a little bit more, especially in recent years. Their ownership groups are backing their managers and are injecting money into the club so that they can reinvest and buy big players. And it just seems like Stan Kroenke has no interest in investing extra money into Arsenal, and he's trying to let it be a self-sustaining environment and something that can recontribute to itself. So basically all the revenues that it makes will go back straight into the club, which means that you're not having this excess money to play with in the transfer market, which we'll see shortly has hurt us in the fact that we haven't been able to acquire the class players that ideally should be representing Arsenal Football Club.
Yeah, for sure. And if you want to just look at how that's affected us, like, first of all, back in, say, the Wenger era, back in the 2000s, even if we get up forward towards 2015, 2016, Arsene Wenger was playing around. It was like you said, Alex, self-sustaining. Arsene Wenger was still having a good, towards the end there, £75 million to play with during the transfer window, which of course is a substantial amount. He was still able to bring in the players that he needed to bring in. But now, as you start to see with circumstances happening, the coronavirus, with teams not being able to bring in as much revenues as before, now when that money's starting to dwindle and when Arsenal's starting to falter a little bit, that ownership investing the money, something that clubs such as Manchester City, Manchester United, Chelsea have been able to do, and Arsenal haven't, has made a great difference in, well, Manchester City say, we need these players, let's go out and get them. We could still go out and get them. Our ownership is going to provide us the money. Arsenal says, oh, we need this player. Well, Kroenke's not giving us the money. we only have X amount to work with. It's not going to be enough. We'll go into it more later.
Well, yeah, we'll get into players a bit more, and we'll talk about the managers next. But that being said, looking at the situation, can you fairly say that Stan Kroenke has backed any of his 3 full-time managers? We won't include Freddie Lundberg and his brief interim stint last season. But whether it be Arsene Wenger, Unai Emery, or Mikel Arteta, he hasn't fairly backed them. And we'll get to Mikel Arteta shortly. But Phil, are there any long-term or are there any short-term solutions to the ownership situation?
Yeah, going back to your point, Alex, he hasn't really backed any of them. Like I said before, Arsenal were a self-sustaining team back in the 2000s. Arsene Wenger was able to get the pieces that he needed, but once it came time that he brought in players like Mustafi and Granit Xhaka that didn't immediately work out like usually, that influx of money from the owner not being there was a huge problem, and I think is the reason that we're in this hole. Now, are there any short-term solutions? I think so. If Stan Kroenke, and this is a major if Stan Kroenke were to be willing to sell the team now that we're sitting in 15th place in the Premier League, there is a willing buyer, it seems. And that willing buyer, Alex, is Nigerian Aliko Dangote, who has a $13.5 billion left net worth and is a stringent Arsenal supporter. So, Alex, that seems like a good alternative if it were to happen.
Yeah, fingers crossed that pans out. He's expressed his interest in buying the club outright several times. His current reason that he's been holding off is that he had a bunch of big billion-dollar projects running throughout 2020, and his ideal is to look to buy the club in 2021. We'll see how that plays out. Fingers crossed, I feel like that would be a huge first step. So we'll see how, again, that plays out. But back to good old Stan Kroenke. When it came to replace Arsene Wenger and trying to move away from the Wenger era, which was huge, admittedly, there were a lot of pieces missing from the club. And the Arsenal board ultimately decided to appoint Unai Emery, who just had a failed stint at PSG. We know he spent a couple of years there and wasn't able to win anything big in Europe-wide. So that being said, the Emery, we saw how that played out. He had one good season, bottled Champions League last minute, and we ended up 5th that season. And then the following season got sacked a portion of the way in. And then we saw Freddie Lundberg take over. And then towards the end of 2019, we saw Mikel Arteta named the permanent manager of Arsenal Football Club. Now, just a little bit of background on Arteta's history. Like Phil said, Arteta played for Arsenal for a number of years, won a number of FA Cups with the club. But at the same time, Arteta was coming out of an assistant managerial role at Manchester City, where he worked under Pep Guardiola. He was a first-time manager, and it seemed like Arsenal was just making the bargain pick. They were buying the cheapest option available, and we've seen in the get-go, when managers are first appointed, they're able to get the most out of their players, and we saw that with winning the FA Cup, with winning the Community Shield, and having big showings against these big clubs, albeit none in the Premier League until earlier this season, where Arsenal had a fairly strong showing against Manchester United. A 1-0 victory. The goal was a penalty kick, but it came down to Arsenal not being able to finish chances. If they could have finished chances, that game would have ended 3 or 4-0. That being said, Phil, was the Arteta appointment a good decision in hindsight? What has Mikel Arteta brought to Arsenal Football Club thus far?
I'd say that it was a great decision. A former player who had been under the tutelage of one of the best managers of our time that we've seen, Pep Guardiola. We've seen him manage Barcelona, a Barcelona squad that was quite the revelation in Spain, and then come to Manchester City and do what he did with them as well. Now, Mikel Arteta, when he came to Arsenal, like you said, Alex, when you get a new manager, you're always going to see an up in energy and up in the way that they play, a lot more positives. And we even saw that with Unai Emery when he relieved Arsene Wenger. Now, Arsene Wenger coming off of a season where he got 5th place in the Premier League, which at the time, Arsenal fans did not like. Unai Emery starting off the season, his first season, decently well, and then, of course, dropping back into that position in 5th place towards the end of the season. Once again, Arsenal fans not happy. Mikel Arteta comes in after, the whole fiasco the following season and injects some hope into Arsenal with winning an FA Cup and a Community Shield. And I feel like that comes with him really expressing that there is an emphasis on work rate. With Arteta, his tactics are very much different from Wenger's and Unai Emery. Wenger emphasized creativity, fluidity, something that the Premier League really hadn't really seen, with a player like Mesut Ozil being allowed to freely roam up top in the cam position, but being allowed to go to either side to be able to open up the defense and get the ball through to Olivier Giroud and Alexis Sanchez. Unai Emery had a very different management style, which emphasized quickness and prowess on the attack, while taking a little less emphasis off the defensive side of the game. Mikel Arteta really goes for a balanced approach that emphasizes, well, I need certain players in certain positions at certain times. A very structured approach that we've seen Pep Guardiola have in his Manchester City side with Kevin De Bruyne, Raheem Sterling, Sergio Aguero playing those parts really, really well. And this is a tactic that requires class players. It requires players to be able to be in certain places at certain times, to be able to do certain things that you'd only expect from the Kevin De Bruynes and Raheem Sterlings of the world. And Arsenal obviously don't have the Kevin De Bruynes and the Raheem Sterlings of the world. So what Mikel Arteta is emphasizing here is you need to put in that effort to get as close as you can to that so that we can get results. And at first he did get those results. Now, unfortunately, it has turned south. And Alex, what are some of the problems that have attributed to that turning south, do you think?
Yeah, I think like you said, the biggest first thing is he doesn't have the personnel to fit those decisions. We've seen players like Gabriel come in, and that's been a revelation in the defense. However, if you look on the right side there, and we'll get to players shortly, there isn't the support that he needs in that back line. You can only say that one player has played at his level, Kieran Tierney, and he's not receiving support from the other side of the defense. On top of that, this is a positive, so mind you, Mikel Arteta, credit to a player like Mohamed El Neni, who we thought after his loan stint at Besiktas last year that his time at the club was completely done. We were happy to cash out, but Mikel Arteta has held on to him, and he's shown that he can be one of those work rate players who I don't think anyone will claim will be a starting 11 player in the long term. However, for the interim, it seems like he fits Mikel Arteta's system, paired with Thomas Partey, who they brought in last transfer window as a huge signing. We see that can be a great option and a great partnership for certain situations where you need to have two holding midfielders. I digress. When it comes to the problems, we've also seen, and this is where my skepticism comes in, is Mikel Arteta's authoritarian stance when it comes to player management. And it seems like it's led to the potential mistreatment or ostracization of multiple players. When you look at the 2 red cards that Arsenal received in the last 4 games, Pepe getting the red card against Leeds, Mikel Arteta came out in the press conference and automatically condemned him instantly for the actions, which were, again, you just don't do that. You don't go and try and headbutt a player. But then we saw this past weekend when Arsenal played against, why am I blanking on who did we play against? Burnley. There we go.
Burnley.
Yeah. When we played against Burnley and Granit Xhaka gets the red card for reaching up and trying to grab someone's neck, he had to be pried throughout the press conference for that same condemnation that he gave to Pepe. On top of that, whatever the Saliba situation is, we won't speculate much, but it's been a shame to see that one of our hottest prospects, and we've been all salivating to see this partnership of Gabriel and William Saliba, and we haven't seen it yet. So, no idea what that situation is. We won't talk about the Mesut Ozil situation. The Guendouzi situation, we know after his altercation with Neil Maupay last season, he was sent out on loan and ostracized from training. Granted, if you believe rumors there, he was given the chance to apologize. He didn't do that. What do we know? And then the same thing, even earlier in the season, he brought in Willian this offseason, and he seems to be favoring him over Pepe, even when Willian has had lackluster performances. He hasn't been terrible, he hasn't been a liability, he just hasn't been lighting it up. And it seems like there is this certain lack of willingness to give the young players a chance. So guys like, obviously, Bukayo Saka, Ainsley Maitland-Niles have been given chances. His other young players, the Joe Wilkes, the Emile Smith-Rowe, the William Salibas, back to that point, it seems like Mikel Arteta doesn't have a desire to. And when it comes to these players like Mesut Ozil who have been left out, Granit Xhaka and that whole situation, it seems like Mikel Arteta might be losing the dressing room, and when you're upsetting these big leaders and these big voices on your team, it seems like he might be losing players. Those are my biggest concerns.
Arteta out the question after we're being sent down to 15th in the Premier League. I don't think we should. However, he needs players to do that. He needs the right players. And I think personally, my opinion, that Alex, the problems that you bring up are stemming from the fact that he hasn't been able to get the right players out of the club and the right players into the club to be able to work right with him. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating.
No, I agree with that. And I think, we'll talk about players shortly. But to your point, when it comes to the Arteta out, I sit on the fence, and again, that personnel reason being my skepticism. But overall, I'd say that I am still in favor of giving him the season and letting him play it out. However, like you said, he needs the backing. If we don't do anything in the January transfer window, we're going to be the same mediocre club. Sure, the offense is slacking, but if you still have these gaping holes in the midfield and you have this lackluster right side of your defense, and Mikel Arteta keeps picking the Hector Bellerins and the Rob Holdings, and I mean, with the Rob Holding situation, he has no other choice. But if you're not giving him the players that he wants to work with and the players that fit his plan, we're not going to get the most out of Mikel Arteta. Yeah, you look at Jose Mourinho at Manchester United and Maurizio Pochettino at Tottenham. Pochettino didn't get the support of his board. He had class players and he had a deeper bench. And look, nothing came out of that time. He wasn't able to win anything. And you look at Jose Mourinho, sure, he won one Europa League. And if you look at that bench, sure, they're a lot deeper than we are. But at the same time, Jose Mourinho received backing from the board, but it was for players that the board wanted and not Jose. When it comes to Arsenal, if you're not getting backing from the owner, what's Arteta supposed to do? And I don't think that Arteta's even going to get sacked. I can see them not wanting to go with this revolving door of owners. Because think about it. Unless things are really, really, really dire, they're not going to sack him. What do you think Stan Kroenke's really going to waste the money that it would cost to fire Mikel Arteta and then bring in a prime coach that they skipped on originally? I think that they have to double down on this decision, but they need to give him the money. Because if you bring in someone like a Massimiliano Allegri, what are you going to do? Bring him into the club and not give him the money that he needs to make the club his? It's going to be the same thing. Stan Kroenke is the biggest problem. I don't think Mikel Arteta is a problem. However, he needs to be backed. It's pure and simple like that. And you know what? Edu did come out yesterday, who's the technical director, former Arsenal player as well, with this following statement. Arteta is doing a great job. We're in the process to have a beautiful future with Mikel. If you can sign 20 players, which we're not going to do, that's not going to work anyways. Why people expect a magician to go, boom, come here, Messi? That's not going to happen. I don't know, Phil. I guess it is a fair statement, but at the same time, they do need to back him and they do need to get these toxic players out.
Yeah, it's a fair statement, and it's something that should be taken to heart by Arsenal supporters in that there's going to be a lot of patience needed. Like I said before, this isn't a solution that's going to happen this season. We're not finishing fourth this season. I don't care who we start. I don't care who we buy. We're not getting back up there. It's not happening, and it likely isn't happening next season. Could there be progressions forward next season? Of course, if the right things were to happen. But like I said, there isn't going to be an overhaul. Now, you need to realize too that Edu and Kroenke, the board, need to realize that they do have to, like you said, back Arteta if we're going to start moving in the right direction. And he's going to need to start getting the players that he needs to fit his tactics, to fit his game plan in order to get that ball rolling. And like I said, get that ball rolling, not get us right into Champions League, not get us right towards back, get us back up towards sixth, towards fifth in the Premier League, maybe next season if we're lucky. And then from there, move on to trying to crack back into the Champions League. And like I said, this is going to be an arduous, painful process for Arsenal supporters. But if it's done right, we could get back towards the top. If it's not, we're going to be stuck in that same vicious cycle, Alex, as you said.
Because I think as far as it stands, it's still fair to say that we're a top 8 club. We're definitely not a top 4 club. Top 6 might be pushing it. But I think top 8 is realistic, and it should be a realistic aim for this season. He just needs the backing. Now, on the point of players, let's run through the roster. We'll give our opinion on who needs to stay, who needs to go. We'll group this by position. We'll give it a yay or a nay, and where we need to elaborate, we'll elaborate. Let's start off with goalkeepers. Bernd Leno, the starting goalie, runner Alex Runnerson, and Matt Macy. I have no problem with that.
No, neither do I. Bernd Leno has been one of the unsung heroes of the club this season. Always been solid in net. Runnerson needs time to progress, to develop. He's only 25, as Icelandic kid who we just got. So I think we're fine at goalkeeper, Alex. I think we can move on to the next position.
Yeah, I mean, one last point. I agree. Bernd Leno over the last couple of years has been the unsung hero. We saw the Martinelli situation lead to questions. Oh, not Martinelli, I should say. The Emi Martinez. There you go. I think Bernd Leno was the right decision. Good on Emi Martinez, and I'm glad that he's having an amazing year at Aston Villa. I hope it works out for him there. At the same time, I think it was time to move on from him, and I'm glad that we could get more money than you would have. I think a season prior, you would have taken a tenth of that £12 million sum. Matt Macy, his contract's expiring in 2021, so I don't see him being re-signed. That is what it is. We move on from there. Now when we look at the center back situation, we have Gabriel, William Saliba, Callum Chambers, Shkodran Mustafi, Rob Holding, Pablo Mari, Socrates, David Luiz. With 8 center backs, there's a huge surplus at the position, and it seems like the majority of them aren't Arsenal quality players.
No, not at all. And I feel like some players like Mustafi and Socrates have seen their time at the club end. I think in January, at all costs, both need to be moving on. I also see that we also have, along with Gabriel starting right now, Rob Holding, who I don't think also is the answer at center back. I think we need a better partnership for Gabriel, who has been playing his tail off this year so far. He has been, in my opinion, the best player in this club by far this season. He's been doing everything in the back. There have been little mistakes here and there, but you got to say, with how he's been playing, the stats he's been putting up, those little mistakes are permissible in the fact that he's trying to do it all back there and can't. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I think it is lacking on that situation. Like you said, Rob Holding, I feel, would be a 3rd or 4th choice center back. I think he's solid at that point. But even then, for Rob Holding, I don't think he works at Arsenal Football Club. Aside from his height, sure, he can head balls well. As a center back, you're supposed to do that. But he's not pacey. You see him when he takes players on one-on-one. If he knows that they're faster than him or they can beat him, he won't challenge them. He won't go for the ball. He'll back up and back up and back up, and it leads to these terrible one-on-one scenarios, and he ends up finding himself burned more often than not. If you look across, let's look at the other center backs. Mustafi, let's just call a spade. That hasn't worked out. His contract expires in June. It's time to just get whatever you can and scrape up that. Socrates, he came in from Dortmund as a promising player. He's a good traditional defender. He doesn't fit Mikel Arteta's style. He doesn't fit Mikel Arteta's plan. He still has some gas left in the tank with his contract expiring in 2021. Time to try and collect some money from that. So I think we'd both agree Mustafi and Socrates need to go out the door now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that we can both also agree that it would be beneficial for Arsenal to keep Pablo Mari and David Luiz in the lineup. I feel that David Luiz is a solid leader and would benefit from being maybe our third choice center back, our center back coming off the bench and providing either defensive help or more stability towards the end of matches. Pablo Mari, despite his injuries, has in the time that he has played showed that he can play well for us. Before he came out in that game against Manchester City a year ago, he had a pretty decent showing. We'll see what happens when he comes back in the fray. I don't think his time at Arsenal is up just yet.
No, I mean, he just signed a 5-year contract, and I think Arteta, having worked with him at Manchester City, is high on him. I'd be interested to see him play alongside Gabriel. Yes, two left-footed defenders isn't traditional, but left-footed defenders are harder to come by. So that'd be interesting. I agree. Gabriel, Pablo Mari, David Luiz, I'm with you there. And then I think Rob Holding and Callum Chambers ultimately in the long term do have to be shifted out. But I don't think either of them get shifted out until you bring in another top quality defender or William Saliba gets reintegrated into the first team. So that's the defense situation. Let's move left back. I don't think there's much to talk about here. Kieran Tierney, Sead Kolasinac.
Yeah.
I think both are serviceable 1 and 2. Obviously, Tierney has been another unsung hero along with Gabriel. Can hold his head high of saying that he's been working his, hardest this season.
Yeah, and if Gabriel's been the best player on our team so far this season, Tierney's easily been number 2. He has been great, not only defending, but going forward. He, unlike Hector Bellerin, who we'll talk about, gets back in defense after providing support in attack, has whipped balls in, great crosses, has been robbed of definitely multiple assists this season from the fact that our players up top can't finish them. And he definitely deserves to be staying on the club long term. He's been a fantastic player.
I agree. And I think I was going to wait to talk about this when we got to the captain of the club. However, I feel that Kieran Tierney is one of the unsung heroes and unsung leaders of Arsenal Football Club, often stepping up to press conferences, speaking on behalf of the players, on behalf of the club, and he's one of the ones who's stepping up into the limelight. Even while he shouldn't be, and while he's not put into that position, he still steps up as a leader. I mean, he came out after our loss against Burnley, made the comments about, getting booed, and he said it was deserved. They're coming out here and supporting us. We're not showing the manager what we can do and how much we believe in him. Every game there are signs that we're doing a bit better, but it's still not good enough. At halftime, we need to be going in the lead, and we're not doing that. Hard work is the only thing that can fix this. Nothing else for it. There are no excuses. There's nothing I can say that'll make people believe positive things are going to come out of this. We're lucky and we have a great manager. We just need to show better on the pitch. I think Kieran Tierney should be given the captain's armband. He's a vocal leader. He's a leader who can rally the players. We've seen him get heated at times, but he's calculated in his approach to dealing with other players.
Yeah, absolutely. And Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang has shown that he's kind of, when he's been the captain, has led by example. He's more of a silent leader. You don't see him being as vocal on the pitch, and really has set the bar by leading by example in the fact that when he's playing well, he expects the other players on the club to play well as well. And he shows, hey, I'm putting the effort in. You should be too. And in this situation, unfortunately, that doesn't exactly help in the fact that a good amount of the rest of the team has been playing poorly. I feel like I agree with you, Alex. We need a more vocal leader on the pitch. And Kieran Tierney is one of the players that would provide that. You see him yelling to other players on the pitch. That's why that left side of the defense has been so solid. I think the communication between Kieran Tierney and Gabriel on that left side have been second to none. And if you allow him to communicate with the rest of the club, to start talking, being more vocal on the pitch towards other players like he has been, that could be beneficial. I also feel like Alexander Lacazette, despite his poor form, could also be a decent captaincy fit in the fact that he also tends to be more vocal on the pitch up top in the attack, which can be beneficial for us.
Yeah, I agree with you on the comment about Aubameyang. It feels like the captaincy was just slapped on him like it was slapped on Mesut Ozil to get them to re-sign. I think he values it, and I think Aubameyang, is a player who, I think what he said after he re-signed, saying that he really wants to, create a legacy for himself and playing for the badge and all this, I think he really does believe it, and it really does mean something to him. I mean, look at his international. He had the chance to play with France, but he ended up ultimately choosing Gabon to follow in his dad's footsteps and to play for them. So I hope it wouldn't be a slap in the face to pull the captaincy from him. I'm afraid it would be, and I'm afraid in his form it would just be another setback. But at the same time, I'd hope that something like that would be able to take the pressure away from him. Now, from there, let's move over to right back. Hector Bellerin, Cedric Suarez, and even though he's been shown by Arteta to be a utility player, we'll count Ainsley Maitland-Niles into this mix. Phil, let's start off with Cedric Suarez. He's a seasoned veteran. Mikel Arteta clearly liked him or he wouldn't have signed him on the free. I think he's a serviceable right back. He's defensively sound, offensively has shown that he can contribute here and there. I'm fine with that as a rotation piece.
Absolutely. I am too. I agree.
So from there, let's go on to, we'll skip over Ainsley for now. Let's go to Hector Bellerin. Hector Bellerin has shown glimpses of being good, and he's shown a greater affinity for his offensive prowess, even though his crosses are garbage and he can't throw in a ball. I think it's just time to move on from Hector Bellerin. I'm going to keep words short when it comes to this.
Yeah, Hector Bellerin has had his best days at Arsenal in the past. I feel like he was better under the tutelage of Arsene Wenger. You saw Arsene Wenger have more of a stress on defense. Hector Bellerin playing more defense. He did come up and play come up into the attack and aid in the attack, but that was a little bit more sparing than it is now. He did score some nice goals, have some decent assists, but ultimately his main thing was his pace coming back on defense was huge for Arsenal. Now you're not seeing that. You're seeing him try desperately to get forward and aid the attack. His crossing hasn't been there. His running forward hasn't been there, even if he is trying to help in the attack. And ultimately, afterwards, he's coming back, trying to come back in defense, hasn't been able to, and has been holding on an island back there in the back four on the counter as the opposition counters, and that has been detrimental at times for Arsenal. I think Hector Bellerin does not fit the squad anymore. I think that we need an Ainsley Maitland-Niles starting at right back right now. He has shown to be a much more stable option, better defending, and also, if need be, can come forward and aid in the attack. But of course, that focus on defense, Hector Bellerin's defense this season hasn't been there.
Well, I think Ainsley Maitland-Niles is a player with a high enough work rate that he can go and contribute offensively, and he's shown that he can do that well, even when he's slotted in the midfield in Europa League. And he's pacey enough to get back and defensively sound enough to be able to position himself well while coming back. I don't know why Mikel Arteta hasn't started him. I hope that Hector Bellerin in the next match against Southampton, being that he's out with 5 yellow cards and given a 1-game suspension, I really want to see Ainsley Maitland-Niles start at that position, and I want him to show us that this faith can be repaid and show us that he is a fit to start at right back. If not, I think when it comes to priorities of what we need to bring in this offseason, we'll talk about that shortly. That position may you may need to look at that. But for now, I think that isn't the biggest priority. What is the highest priority, however, is the midfield. And let's talk about that shambolic state. Arsenal traditionally has always had one of the most sound midfields in football. Whether you go back to your Patrick Vieiras, you move up to, the Santi Cazorlas, even prime Mesut Ozil, these amazing midfielders, dynamic, being able to split the defense and create opportunities for the strikers. Our midfield isn't doing that. Thomas Partey has been a revelation. Thomas Partey is a world-class player. He is what Arsenal Football Club need. However, his partners are more than lackluster. Granit Xhaka, let's start there. Personally, I never want to see Granit Xhaka wear an Arsenal kit ever again.
Yeah, and Granit Xhaka never really panned out, never really fit. And that's part of the reason why we're here, of course, after just under $50 million were spent on him in 2017. Now, Granit Xhaka was brought in for holding midfield. He was seen to be this big player who's able to also distribute the ball very well. He also had a decent shot too at Borussia Mönchengladbach, which we saw flashes of course, in matches against Liverpool and Newcastle United, where he scored 2 very nice long-range goals. Now, Granit Xhaka has had a very, very, very poor season. I feel like his distribution hasn't been there. He hasn't been able to unlock the midfield for us, which in turn, I think is part of the reason why, and this problem stems off to Dani Ceballos as well, part of the reason why we haven't been able to attack in the midfield. Mikel Arteta has been forced to go down the channels as his main source of attack through Tierney, Aubameyang, Saka, Bellerin, and try to just cross the ball in at will, because we just haven't had the midfield to the middle of the pitch to our disposal, other than when Thomas Partey is on the pitch and is able to unlock that for us by moving forward and drawing in defenders. Now, Granit Xhaka can't do that for you, and I feel like he should be out of the club. I think we should bring up Dani Ceballos where we're at it too. I think he has been lackluster this season, hasn't been his same self though he was last year going forward. I think he needs to go back to Real Madrid and stay there next season, and we need to basically, aside from Thomas Partey, reconfigure that midfield.
Yeah, I mean, back to the Granit Xhaka and the last point on that. We were told he was a holding midfielder. He's shown that he can't do that. We were told that, he has the potential to be box to box, and you've seen that with Switzerland. He hasn't done that. He's not a creative midfielder, so what is he? It's just taking up a spot on the field. We're told that he's a leader. You see that he's captain of Switzerland. What leader fights with the fans, argues with the fans, criticizes the fans who are criticizing fairly his terrible performances? Who rips off their jersey, tosses on the field? I think we all thought that was his time to go when he did that last year. And Mikel Arteta really believed that he had the potential to step up, believed in him, and he showed when he, hit form last year that he can be serviceable. That's back out the window. I think that this is the last straw. He needs to move on. Dani Ceballos has shown flashes of being what we need in an engine midfielder, but I think the form is just inconsistent enough that it might just be time to move on, and I agree with you. When it comes to our other 2 midfielders, as far as central midfielders are concerned, Mohamed El-Neni, again, I think he's a good squad rotation piece. In right situations, he can be a good work rate player. He has a high work rate. He fits Mikel Arteta's system like that. He just isn't good enough to be a starting 11 player. As a rotation piece and for the interim, I'm more than happy to have Mohamed El-Neni in the mix. Long term, I don't know. Joe Willock shows a lot of potential. I'd really like to see him feature in the side more to give him a bigger chance. I think there's a lot of raw potential there. Emil Smith-Rowe as well at the attacking midfielder situation. I don't know why we haven't seen Emil Smith-Rowe play. A lot of raw potential there. Yes, he is inexperienced, but I'm not saying to put out a starting 11 of all these young academy graduates and these young players, but I'd like to see the integration more. Just, we haven't had creativity. What does it hurt to just start Emil Smith-Rowe if we don't have any other players coming in the next couple of weeks at the least?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I think that, like I said, going back to the patience aspect, it doesn't matter who you start. People are crying out, we need to be starting Maitland-Niles. We would be in this mess if we started Maitland-Niles, Smith-Rowe, Willock. None of that is going to change much in the fact that, though, at this point, I feel like we need to start starting them just for the fact that they need to gain experience, and we need to know if they are part of the solution going forward. Emil Smith-Rowe having a great midweek match against I forget who it was in the Europa League that we played against, but he had
Dundalk.
Yeah, Dundalk. He performed well. Joe Willock has shown that he could perform well under Arteta last season. I don't know what happened to him this season. Same thing with Reece Nelson, as we'll bring up. But I think that right now we need to start giving more chances to those players. And Alex, let's move on to the attack. Let's move on to the wings. What do we have looking there?
Yeah, well, let's skip over Mesut Ozil completely. Again, that ship has sailed. We'll find out what happens, I'm sure, when he leaves and when he comes out to speak about it. But again, for the interim, he's a non-factor. Left side of the attack, Bukayo Saka, Gabriel Martinelli. I'm happy with that 1 and 2. I want to see them both. I'm looking forward to Martinelli coming back. We saw how dynamic he can be. He's one of those players in the offense that we're lacking now that can create something out of nothing. I don't want to put too much pressure on him, but him coming back and being in the mix will be a great way to relieve some of the pressure that Bukayo Saka has faced. He's been overplayed both with Arsenal and internationally with England. So it'll be nice to see a little bit of relief when it comes to that. I don't have an issue with the left side. I think you'd agree, so let's move straight to the right side. Nicola Pepe, Willian, and Reece Nelson. I don't think that the Willian experiment has worked out.
Yeah, and I think that, if we could get him out in January, I think that we should. There have been teams now that have expressed some kind of interest. I think he should be moved. I think Pepe should be given more of a chance. He's been starting to play better in Europa League. I understand his performance against Leeds United was what it was, but he was our big signing just a couple years ago, and he's shown flashes here and there that he could perform. Let's give him a chance to. Also, I am a huge, huge backer of Reece Nelson. From when he's played, he has shown flashes of brilliance on that right-hand side. I don't understand why he's not getting more of a chance going forward.
Yeah, he's another work rate player who I am really interested to see what he can do in splitting that defense. I mean, that's what we're missing in the midfield, a player who can rush, regardless if it's at midfield, or regardless if it's sitting further back, I should say, or sitting at an attacking midfielder position. There's no players to split the defense, make these runs. Nicola Pepe is one of those players who I feel has the potential to create something from nothing, and I really want to see him back in the squad against Southampton. When it comes to Reece Nelson, I think that's a great piece to come off the bench, something that can re-energize a game. I like that situation. I'm not concerned about the right. I'm not concerned about the left. I agree with you. You have teams like Real Betis supposedly interested in Willian. If you can get money for him, take the profit, use it towards something that we need. We don't need the surplus on the wing. When it comes to center forward, we have 3 center forwards. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Alexander Lacazette, who has been playing at the number 10. And, I actually like Alexander Lacazette at that position. And then we have Eddie Nketiah as far as senior players are concerned. Florian Balogun is coming up. He's shown flashes of being really, really good in Europa League. We'll count him. We won't talk about Balogun right now. Hopefully he resigns and hopefully he continues to develop. When it comes to Aubameyang, we know how world-class Aubameyang is. He's a world-class finisher. His pace is one of his greatest aspects. He's not a player who's going to create something out of nothing, But when he's in form, he's making these runs into open space. He's making the smart runs. He's getting the ball in good positions when he can be given the ball by competent players, and he's finishing. Yes, we've seen him and Lacazette with shaky finishing, but, I don't blame Aubameyang. Over all the years of his careers, this is the worst form he's been in. He'll shake it. We know the quality that he has. Alexander Lacazette as well. I feel like he still does have a future with this club. He's a leader. He's very vocal, like we've said. I think that he's a great assist piece if we do play him in that kind of a more sat back role where he can help be creative, he can help contribute to the offense. I don't mind that. Eddie Nketiah playing up top has also shown that he's a high work rate player, like Reece Nelson, someone who's great at leading the pressure, who can be a finisher. It'll come in the Premier League, give him the service that he needs, and it will come. I don't have an issue with either of our three center forwards. The one issue I do have is the finishing. The way that Arteta's been playing with crossing the ball in, none of them are proficient on their head and none of them really own a box. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we're lacking there right now.
Yeah, and like I said, I feel like Arteta has been forced to do that scenario, playing the ball out wide, and the fact that we can't unlock the midfield like we had in the previous season. And that could come from players just not having that same work rate, that same attention to detail as they had last season, and we'll move it forward from that now. Let's go over quickly as we are running out of time. Let's run into a few solutions. Let's go through quickly some potential acquisitions that can help out. Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, let's start off. So I think looking at everything and looking at that situation, we've pointed out our biggest areas of needs as being a center attacking midfielder who is creative, a engine midfielder who is good on the ball, is creative with their passes, and can rush the defense to, get them out of position and create these openings for your Aubameyangs and your Lacazettes. From there, like we had mentioned, center forwards who can own the box and who are good heading the ball if we're insistent on and good at finishing from crosses if we're insistent on playing that way, because I think that style of play still doesn't get eliminated completely with creative midfielders and with engine midfielders, but it's another great option coming off the bench because that's something we don't have. If you look at our starting 11's okay, I guess, but there aren't really many dynamic options to pull off on the bench to change up the play. Like, what are you going to do? Pull off Aubameyang or Lacazette to put on Nketiah? It's the same type of player. We don't have that diversity in the attack. And then the fourth highest priority is probably the right back if they're insistent on bringing in replacements. So let's start at the center attacking midfielders and name a couple of the players that we've picked out as being great options or great potential signings. They're realistic signings. So let's run through these. Obviously, the player that we've been linked with the most, Dominik Szoboszlai from RB Salzburg. He's only 20 years old. He's shown this great potential, and he's been a hot commodity. Yes, he has this £25 million release clause, and I think every club, and I think Arsenal should jump at that opportunity to get a player like that for that cheap. However, it's going to ultimately come down to where he decides to go.
Yep, it is, absolutely. And then we also have Buendia and Isco. Buendia from Norwich could also be a low-cost option if Arsenal decide to go that route. And Isco, of course, from Real Madrid. We've seen what he could do there. He is the oldest of the three options, the most experienced in that trio.
And Isco has fallen off, and hasn't been favored the last couple of years. So I think it is really interesting to have that potential. I know that they've been talking a loan for 6 months with the option or obligation to buy for £18 million. I think that you should jump at that opportunity too if the Szoboszlai falls through. Buendia is another great look. would be, I believe, a cheaper option with someone with Premier League experience. That's great. If Szoboszlai does go to RB Leipzig, it might be worth looking at RB Leipzig to see if you can get them to split with any of their attacking midfielders at a reasonable price. Someone like a Christopher Nkunku or Danny Olmo, which is more of a stretch. I don't see them letting him go. And even Nkunku is playing on the left side now. He's not playing so much centrally, so that might be a stretch, but I think one of them does need to be brought in. Now, if we look at the engine midfielders, I should preface this. Yesterday, we're recording this on the 15th. On the 14th, news came out that Atletico Madrid are looking to end the loan spell of Lucas Torreira at the club and send him back to Arsenal in January. I think that could be we've seen the energy, the passion that he shows. I still think that there is the potential for a future at Arsenal Football Club for Lucas Torreira if he wants it. But I'd really like, and I really, salivate at the thought of him playing alongside Thomas Partey in the midfield. I don't know, Phil, what do you think about that?
I think he could definitely be a good option to see if he comes back and is able to perform the way that he had when he first was playing for the club, because he was brilliant. I bet you all remember how he was playing back then. We also have Aouar, Bissouma, and Rodrigo de Paul as other options. Bissouma and Rodrigo de Paul being less expensive options, but haven't really exactly shown that they could be the answer. Aouar, of course, a world-class player for Lyon, has also been linked to PSG. He would be a lot more expensive. We need that backing from Kroenke. If we were to get Houssem Aouar, Aouar would probably be worth somewhere in the realm of 60 to 70 million pounds.
Well, we'll see how the Aouar situation works. We know that he's a world-class player that would instantly step up and buy a midfielder at the quality of Thomas Partey. Rodrigo de Paul from Udinese, 26 years old. If you watch him play, there's flashes of brilliance. I think that would be a worthwhile risk. And, Yves Bissouma, we've seen the potential in him. We've seen him play at Brighton. He's Premier League ready. I think that could be a potential option, but we'll see how that plays out. At striker, or at center forward, whichever you want to call it, you need a player who owns the box. A couple of players that we have been rumored to be interested in for one reason or another. Maxi Gomez, he is currently available potentially because of the club's financial difficulties. If you can get him for a fraction of his £31.5 million valuation, I think that would be a great look at 24 years old. Someone who, too, would also be interesting, Phil, Alexander Mitrovic from Fulham. We've seen Fulham turn it around after pretty much giving the entire team a facelift and changing that starting 11. He hasn't even been coming on much. I feel like with someone who's shown that he can be a prolific scorer in the Championship and who hasn't had the service he's needed in the Premier League to meet that level of potential, I feel like Mitrovic would be an interesting look if you can get an out-of-favor Alexander Mitrovic at a realistic price point.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's shown that he could be a prolific scorer. He has not been favored at Fulham. He doesn't fit their style anymore. They're going through a more quick, prolific look with Decordova Reed and Lookman, both up top being the playmakers there. Obviously, Caballero also. And Mitrovic hasn't exactly been the guy who they need anymore. And Arsenal, I feel like, can benefit if they were able to get him for a realistic price to play in our squad. If we continue to do what we've been doing. Also, we have Weghorst as an option as well. Weghorst playing for Wolfsburg in Germany. He has been a revelation this season for their club, scoring a lot of goals from that center forward position, has shown that he could boss around the box. He would be a little bit tougher to get at a higher price.
Yeah, Weghorst is an interesting prospect. He is an older player. He's 28, so that is a little, less attractive than the other two. But at the same time, over the last couple of years, Weghorst has shown that he can be, a proficient scorer and can run that box. So it is interesting. On to the last position that needs attention. Hector Bellerin needs to leave this season. If Mikel Arteta still insists on using Ainsley Maitland-Niles as a utility player, slotting him in wherever he feels that he can work best at that game, we need another starting right back. Max Aarons from Norwich, we know that he's been linked to these big clubs this past summer, didn't end up moving. I think that's definitely someone that needs to be looked at. Tariq Lamptey from Brighton is another has shown his potential. I think could be an option to work. And then if you want to talk someone more experienced, not in the Premier League, but in Switzerland and in the Bundesliga, Kevin Mbabu would be an interesting look for someone who, is pacey, has a high work rate, but has also shown offensive and defensive prowess.
Yeah, absolutely. And right back, maybe not our biggest need, but something that could definitely be looked at in the future.
So yeah, I mean, we'll see how things go. We'll see how these last couple of games before the January transfer window pan out. We'll see where that comes, but that rounds out just scratching the surface on the shambolic state of Arsenal Football Club. It's not great to have one of world football's biggest clubs in such a situation, and hopefully things can be turned around on every face. But unfortunately, being that none of us have a hand in this, let's just see how this pans out.
Yep, I think we're both obviously hoping for the best, but I'm hoping that for all other Arsenal supporters listening, that this gives a little bit more of an insight as to what's going on, where the problems lie, and how they can be started to be fixed.
Let's quickly jump into this week in the news. We saw yesterday, on Monday the 14th, the Europa League and Champions League round of 32 and round of 16 respectively draws completed. Let's just run through the matchups really fast. We'll make comments on any ones that are really intriguing, but again, this won't come till next year, so we can revisit it then. In the Europa League, we have Wolfsburg facing off against Tottenham, Dynamo Kiev facing off against Club Brugge, Real Sociedad versus Manchester United, a clash of two big clubs facing off. And speaking of two big clubs facing off, Benfica versus Arsenal. It's interesting, Phil. Arsenal still, regardless of their shambolic state in the Premier League, are undefeated in Europe and are the only club undefeated in Europe. And yes, you look at Arsenal's group and you say, well, they didn't really have any teams that, any high-level teams that would really give them a run for their money. But at the same time, you can only beat what's in front of you. Now that we have Benfica in front of us, it'll definitely be interesting to see how that matchup comes off. Antwerp. Sorry. No, go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting to see how Arsenal does against a team like Benfica.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. So then we have Antwerp Rangers, Slavia Praha versus Leicester, Salzburg versus Villarreal, Braga Roma, Krasnodar versus Dynamo Zagreb, Young Boys versus Leverkusen, Molde Hoffenheim, Granada Napoli, Maccabi Tel Aviv versus Shakhtar, Lille versus Ajax, Olympiacos versus PSG, which is an interesting clash there in itself. And then rounding off the Europa League, we have Crvena Zvezda versus AC Milan. Interesting matchups there. We'll see how that pans out. Now for Champions League, I should say. And these clashes are, for the majority, very interesting. It'll be interesting to see how they pan out. Leipzig faces off against Liverpool in February. Barcelona against PSG. Huge clash there. We have the Messi versus the Neymar storyline. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Juve will be playing Porto. Sevilla against Borussia Dortmund. Lazio versus Bayern Munich. Atletico versus Chelsea. Borussia Mönchengladbach versus Manchester City. and Atalanta versus Real Madrid. It'll be interesting to see how these games play out, Phil, if there are any of the upsets, and, for the games that are clashes of the giants, seeing how that pans out.
Absolutely. Definitely some interesting matches that we will see come February.
So, from there, why don't we quickly jump into last week's results? In the Champions League, we saw United get knocked out against RB Leipzig, losing that game 3-2. Phil, you accurately predicted the scoreline, while I thought that United would squeak through with a draw.
Yep, and can't believe I was right. I'm not normally right on predictions, but here we are, 3-2 Leipzig victory. All credit to Leipzig for turning their season into one that is exciting now, challenging in the Bundesliga and now through in the Champions League as well.
Juve Barca, we had both said a 2-1 win for Juve, but Juve's 3-0 win put them atop the division and gave them, potentially a more relaxed round of 16 opponent than Barcelona. I think you definitely rather want to see Porto than PSG that early in Champions League. From there, Real versus Atleti. Now, both of us had said that Atleti was going to win. My win was more modest. I said that Atleti would win 1-0. You said they'd win 4-0. And boy, were we wrong, because Real Madrid showed up and showed up big, as they tend to do in these Madrid derbies, and won 2-0.
Yeah, absolutely. And all credit to Real Madrid. I thought they looked very shaky going into the match. I thought Atleti had everything figured out. Turns out Real Madrid decided to get things together and get things to where quickly, building off a win against Sevilla and grabbing another 3 points in Madrid.
So from there, United versus City played out to be a boring 0-0 draw. I had predicted a City win of 3-1. You had predicted a United win of 2-0. Boy, were we both wrong. But speaking of us being wrong, PSG Lyon. I had said that PSG would win 4-1. You had said PSG would win 3-1. And did we underestimate Lyon? Definitely, we underestimated their result, but we both predicted that they would score 1 goal. We just didn't predict they'd keep a clean sheet. So, credit to Lyon there. Again, PSG showing that they're mortal in France and keeping that race interesting.
Yes, absolutely. What a match from Lyon. Defensively holding PSG. That's nothing to scoff at. And yeah, we were both wrong. And with that, let's go into our must-watch matches of this week. A jam-packed week, 2 matches for each club in each division of the world. The best ones that you must watch. Let's start on Wednesday. Tottenham Hotspur taking on Liverpool. Alex, what do you think there?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting matchup. However, based off of both of their form, Liverpool, in a game that they really should have lost against Fulham, squeaking out a 1-1 draw. And Tottenham, based off of their current form, I think Mourinho will just tend to sit back against these bigger clubs and try and counter. If they catch them on the counter, I can see Tottenham winning. However, I just have a feeling that's going to draw out to a pretty uneventful 1-1 draw.
Yeah, and I think, on the contrary, Liverpool, where do the injuries end? Diogo Jota now out 6 to 8 weeks. Such a dynamic, prolific player that came through the transfer window. He has been fantastic for them. He's now not in the lineup. That is going to affect them. I think all the other injuries are starting to affect them. We'll see if Matip is able to return. If not, there's a hole in that defense yet again. And I think Tottenham will take advantage. 2-1 Spurs for me. We now keep it on Wednesday to Serie A. Juventus taking on Atlanta. Interesting matchup here.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting clash. Juve hopefully being able to get things in order and turn them around. That being said, I'll predict Juve beat Atalanta 2-1.
And I think that Juve have really turned things around, but Atalanta are going to be a tough opponent. I'm going to go, in this case, Alex, with a 1-1 draw here. And now we shift our focuses to the weekend, the Bundesliga. Bayern Munich taking on Bayer Leverkusen, who currently sit in first position. Leverkusen. Alex, what happens here?
Yeah, it'll be an interesting matchup. Bayern has shown a bit of shakiness with the injuries. Alphonso Davies, even though that he is still relatively fresh to the Bundesliga, has shown that his presence has been missed. Granted, I think that this will be a turnaround time for Bayern. I think they'll show up, and I think that they will win at a scoreline of 3-1.
Yeah, Alex, I think that I am going to agree with you there. I'm going to also say a 3-1 Bayern win over Leverkusen. Despite Leverkusen's success, I think they are going to run into a red hot Bayern team and get smoked. I'm going to say 3-1 as well. Moving to La Liga, Barcelona, after another big 3 points, starting to get back on track. But now they have a much tougher matchup in Real Sociedad, who still sit in La Liga's top 4.
Yeah, I don't see this being a turnaround game for Barcelona. And for that reason, I'll just straight away give Sociedad a 3-1 win.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit closer. I think the attack for Barcelona has gotten better. However, Real Sociedad have still been in good form. I'm going to give Sociedad the benefit of the doubt and give them a 3-2 victory. We'll see how that goes. That'll be an interesting matchup to watch. And lastly, we head to France. Ligue 1, PSG, fresh off of a shocking loss to Lyon, take on Lille without Neymar. Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that Lille will continue their good run of form, and I can see them coming out on top of this game with a scoreline of 2-1. I still think that PSG's attack will, push them to their limits, but I still think Lille will come out of this with the 3 points.
Yeah, and I think, Alex, that Lille are going to win as well. But I think without Neymar, that attack is going to be heavily crippled. I think Lille are going to hold PSG to another goalless game, 2-0, my prediction there.
Well, there we go. That wraps up episode 3 of the Cleats First, Logic Second football podcast. It'll definitely be interesting again. It's not something that we wanted to talk about, and it's not something we want to tackle. However, in breaking down this new series of looking at teams that have fallen from grace in ways that they can be brought back up, Arsenal's definitely not one of the easiest of those on the list. But that being said, we'll see how that turns around. Thank you again, everyone, for listening.
Yes, thank you everyone for listening. Tune in next week when we talk about the sophomore slump in the Premier League. Is it an issue? And how can teams combat it? We'll be going through all that next week. Stay tuned. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter, Cleats Then Logic. And also, remember, meat first, soccer second. Have a great week.
Take care, guys.